The morning of April 12 began like any other in the quiet suburban home of Eleanor Mitchell. The familiar scent of coffee, dark and bitter the way she'd taken it since her husband passed, mingled with the lemony polish on the old oak furniture. Sunlight fell in predictable rectangles across the living room carpet, illuminating motes of dust dancing in silent, endless orbits. At 68, Eleanor found comfort in these routines. They were the architecture of her solitude, a careful bulwark against the quiet that had grown larger since retirement, since her son, David, had moved to the city. David was coming today. This, too, was part of the routine, a monthly Sunday visit. He would arrive with a dutiful hug, a bouquet of slightly wilted supermarket flowers, and they would share a stilted lunch where the main topics were his work in software development, the neighbor's doings, and her manageable arthritis. The conversations were a well-trodden path, avoiding the chasms of deeper feeling, the loneliness that sometimes echoed in her big house, his own unspoken pressures in a demanding world that felt galaxies away from this tidy living room. She loved him fiercely, a love that had sustained her through long nights of parenting alone, but a certain polite distance had settled between them, as if neither knew how to bridge the gap between mother and grown son. She was arranging shortbread cookies on her good china plate when the doorbell rang, precisely at noon. A smile touched her lips. Punctual, always. But when she opened the door, the smile faltered. David stood there, but not as she expected. No briefcase, no laptop bag slung over his shoulder. Instead, he held a simple, worn leather satchel she hadn't seen in years. His eyes, the same hazel as his father's, held a nervous, shining energy. "Mum," he said, and his voice was softer, warmer than usual. He stepped forward and hugged her, not the quick, one-armed squeeze of recent years, but a long, firm embrace that felt like a homecoming. "David, are you all right?" she asked, pulling back to search his face. "More than all right," he said, his grin widening. "I have the whole day planned. But first, rule number 1, no housework, no questions about my 401k, and no talk about the Johnsons' new landscaping." Eleanor's eyebrows rose. This was unprecedented. "Planned, David? I've made a roast. It'll keep," he said, gently steering her toward the kitchen. "Trust me." In the kitchen, he wouldn't let her lift a finger. He made fresh coffee, doctoring hers with just the right splash of cream. He took the roast and put it in the refrigerator. Then, from the satchel, he pulled out a small, gift-wrapped box. "Part 1, he announced. Inside was a brand new smartphone. Eleanor sighed. "David, you know I have my little flip phone. It's perfectly adequate." "Humor me," he said. For the next hour, in her sunlit kitchen, David patiently guided her through the device. But this wasn't a frustrated, speed tutorial. He showed her how to video call, opening a new world of face-to-face connection. "See, now when I'm not here, you can actually see me bothering you," he teased. He downloaded a music app and created a playlist titled Mom's Kitchen. The first song he played was Unchained Melody by the Righteous Brothers. As the soaring vocals filled the room, Eleanor's breath caught. It was the song she and her husband, Robert, had danced to at their wedding. She looked at David, her vision blurring. "How did you?" "Dad told me, a long time ago," David said quietly. He said it was the song that made him believe in forever. That was the moment the first tiny crack appeared in Eleanor's wall of routine. The careful order of her day was being gently, irrevocably dismantled. After lunch, which David insisted on making, a simple but delicious omelette, he led her to the car. "Part 2, he declared. They didn't go to a restaurant or a movie. Instead, David drove them to the local community college. Eleanor was thoroughly confused. "David, what on earth?" He led her to a bulletin board in the bustling arts building. His finger landed on a flyer for a beginner's pottery class, meeting Wednesday afternoons. "You always loved making things," he said. "I remember the clay mugs we made in summer camp that year. Yours was lopsided but you were so proud of it." Eleanor's heart gave a little flutter. She had forgotten that mug, forgotten the cool, slick feel of the clay, the joy of creation buried under decades of grocery lists and tax returns. "Oh, I'm too old to start something like that," she demurred, the automatic response of someone used to shrinking her world. "You're not," David said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He then guided her to the library, where a flyer advertised a weekly book club for historical fiction. Another flyer was for a volunteer program reading to children at the elementary school. He didn't sign her up for anything. He simply presented options, like a menu for a new life she hadn't dared to consider. The afternoon sun was warm as they walked back to the car. "You think I need hobbies," she said, a touch of defensiveness in her voice. "I think you need joy," David corrected her softly. "Specific, personal joy. Not just the joy of being my mum, which is immense, but joy for Eleanor. No one had spoken of Eleanor in decades. She was Mum, Mrs. Mitchell, the widow on Elm Street. To hear her own name on her son's lips, attached to the concept of joy, was profoundly disorienting. The next stop was a small park by a willow-fringed pond. From the satchel, David produced a slightly stale loaf of bread. "For the ducks," he said. As they tore pieces and tossed them to the eager quacking crowd, David began to talk, not about work, but about his life. He spoke of his own loneliness in the city, the pressure he felt to always be achieving, the fear that he was disappointing her by not being married, not giving her grandchildren. He confessed he'd been seeing a therapist, who had helped him understand that in trying to be the perfect son who had everything figured out, he had stopped being a real, connected son. "I pulled away because I thought my worries were a burden to you," he admitted, staring at the ripples in the water. "I thought my job was to be your success story, not another problem to solve." Eleanor listened, the bread crumbling forgotten in her hands. She saw the little boy who used to bring her dandelion bouquets, now a man carrying invisible weights. "You have never, ever been a burden, David. You are my heart, walking around outside my body. But I thought my job was to not worry you, to be the strong, independent mother so you could fly." They sat in silence for a moment, a new understanding weaving itself between them on the bench. The unspoken pact of mutual protection was being dissolved, replaced by something more honest and far more tender. As dusk began to paint the sky in watercolor hues of orange and purple, they returned home. Eleanor expected the day to be over, but David had one more thing. In the living room, he asked her to sit on the sofa. From the satchel's depths, he pulled out a large, flat, carefully wrapped package. "This is part 3, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The most important part." With careful hands, Eleanor untied the string and peeled back the paper. Beneath it was a magnificent, handcrafted picture frame. But it wasn't empty. Mounted and preserved under the glass was a tapestry of memories, a collage of their life. Not just the formal portraits, but the real, messy, beautiful proof of their journey. There was the ultrasound image where he was just a blurry peanut, the faded crayon drawing of Mommy and me from kindergarten, his clumsy third-grade handwriting describing her as the best cooker. There was a ticket stub from a science fair where his volcano erupted perfectly, a ribbon from a soccer tournament where he'd scored the winning goal, a pressed corsage from his senior prom. And nestled in the center was a photo of the three of them, Robert, beaming with pride, a younger Eleanor with laughter lines around her eyes, and a gawky teenage David, all of them squeezed together on this very sofa. But David wasn't done. He pointed to the bottom right corner of the frame. There, in a special small recess, was a smooth, grey stone, and next to it, a blank card. "The stone," David said, kneeling before her, taking her hands in his, "is from Dad's grave. I visited him last week. I told him about my plan. I asked him for a little piece of him to be here, with us, today." A tear escaped and traced a path down his cheek. "And the blank card, that's for the future, Mum. It's for the memories we haven't made yet, the ones we're going to make together." Eleanor Mitchell looked from the stone, a tactile piece of her enduring love, to the blank card, a promise of a future she had thought was behind her. The dam within her, built over years of quiet strength and unspoken loneliness, finally broke. A sob wrenched itself from her chest, not a sob of sadness, but of profound, overwhelming release. It was the sound of ice cracking on a frozen river, letting the current of life flow freely once more. She pulled David into her arms, and they wept together on the living room floor, surrounded by the ghosts of their past and the breathtaking promise of what was still to come. He hadn't just given her gifts, he had given her back herself, Eleanor, and he had offered her a new chapter in their story, one they would write side by side. In the weeks and months that followed, the change in Eleanor was not just noticeable, it was radiant. She signed up for that pottery class. Her first few bowls were, as she laughingly admitted, profoundly abstract, but her hands remembered the joy of creation. She joined the book club, her insights on post-war novels surprising even herself. She started reading to a captivated audience of first graders every Thursday, their wide-eyed wonder a tonic for her soul. But the most profound change was in their relationship. The monthly visits became weekly video calls, filled with easy laughter and real talk. David shared his setbacks and fears, Eleanor shared her new adventures and small triumphs. They became not just mother and son, but dear friends, confidants who had looked into the abyss of separation and chosen, instead, to build a bridge. One Wednesday evening, 6 months after the day, Eleanor was at her pottery wheel, her hands slick with grey clay, trying to center a stubborn lump. The doorbell rang. Wiping her hands on her apron, She answered it to find David on the doorstep, holding 2 cups of her favorite coffee. "Surprise," he said. "I had a meeting nearby." She pulled him inside, babbling about centrifugal force and the tyranny of unscented clay. He listened, smiling, as he always did now. As they sat at the kitchen table, the old, familiar room felt entirely new. It was filled with her new pottery, a stack of library books, and the vibrant energy of a life being fully lived. David reached into his bag and pulled out a small, flat object wrapped in simple brown paper. "Another one for the collection," he said. Eleanor unwrapped it. It was a beautiful, hand-painted card. On the front was a delicate illustration of a willow tree by a pond. Inside, in David's neat script, it read, "For Mum to remember the day we started talking again, and for all the conversations to come. I love you, David." She looked at the blank space in the grand memory frame, still waiting on the living room wall. She walked over, and with a reverence that felt like a sacred ritual, she slid this new card into the slot beside the smooth grey stone. The past and the present now sat side by side, holding a space for all the tomorrows. Eleanor turned to her son, her eyes shining with unshed tears of pure happiness. She didn't say thank you again. Those words had been spent. Instead, she took his face in her hands, her fingers still faintly smelling of earth and clay, and said, "My beautiful boy, you didn't just move me that day. You set me free." David leaned his forehead against hers, a gesture of intimacy they had rediscovered. In the quiet kitchen, with the scent of coffee and clay hanging in the air, they stood together, 2 souls who had journeyed to the edge of a polite,